This is a supplementary lecture on scoping for the Executive Black Belt course of a straight line. So what we want to do is here is we want to talk about what are some of the ideas and things that you can use to effectively scope your project. So what is this all about? Well, everybody who's been around the block a little bit understands that one of the major problems with executing on projects is either the scope was too big to begin with, right? Scope means just the breadth of the project. What's in scope, what's out of scope, how much is in it. Or it can also suffer from something called scope creep. So, which is that as a project goes on, more and more things get piled onto it. All right. So how can you ensure that that doesn't happen? And what are some of the tools? Well, I think the key thing that we want to communicate right now is that if you've been having regular meetings with your sponsor or your steering team, that this is something to constantly put in front of them. And it's best if you can make a picture of that, which would be helpful as well. Okay, the second thing is that you can, excuse me, is that scoping is an art, and it takes the way that it works is you ask a series of questions about what's in and what's out. And we'll give you some guidelines on that, as well as some tools to be using in terms of the science, right? So the idea will be essentially, how can we provide a tremendous amount of value while at the same time getting focus? All right, so here are some of the, if we can, for just a moment, let's discuss what some of those ways of scoping would be. So here are a few ways to scope. First of all, you can ask which customers are in or out of scope. That's one way of scoping. You can also ask things like which defects. If you're trying to reduce defects, you may have like 5 or 6 different defects that are in, or 5 or 6 different defects that could be reduced. Maybe you want to say which defects want to be reduced. So that's often a good one. You can also say sort of which products or services are included. In this project. Okay. You can also ask the question, if you're a fairly big company, you can ask which departments. If you're a moderate-sized company, you can certainly ask which departments. See if I can spell correctly. Are included. Or if you're a large company, you might even ask the question of which divisions are included in this. All right. And so forth. Now, those are some questions that we can ask that are, the only one that's really sort of content-related questions are these right here, is this one right here. That's kind of a specific one. But we can also ask the question like which process steps are included. Now, this one can be particularly helpful if you're trying to reduce time. So if you're trying to reduce time, maybe certain things are going to be out of scope and you won't try and reduce the time in those particular process steps. So those are some ways of doing that. Now, let me think about this. Suppose that if I were running a McDonald's and I wanted to reduce the amount of thrown out food, I might ask the question about which customers. It might be sort of like, well, do I want to limit it to lunch customers or dinner customers or something like that? I might want to say, which things I'm burning and throwing out. Is it just quarter pounders, or is it quarter pounders and Big Macs, or is it quarter pounders and Big Macs and fries, or is it everything? That's basically the same in this case of asking, sort of which products or services, but I could also go as far as saying like, well, is it just the in-house dining, or is it people going through the drive-through as well? Probably it would be all. I could ask which departments. In this case, in McDonald's, it may be maybe only the night shift or whatever, and which divisions. That would only be true if I owned, multiple McDonald's. Maybe it would be which stores. And finally, which process steps? Would it be just the cooking, or would it be the cooking and orders, or would it be the cooking, the orders, and the bagging it up or putting it in the bins? So all of those things maybe are places where food could be burned, and so that we would be able to scope it that way. Okay, but it's really just, it really is an art to doing this. Okay, whoops, that didn't happen right. Here we go, back at where we started. Okay, so let's take a look at that. After we complete this, you'll be able to use your previous work to effectively scope your project. Okay, the three tools, the three places that I think that we can really do this are, we can do it using a SIPOC. That's often very helpful. We can also do it using cost per quality. Remember when I said that cost per quality is a good way of scoping your project down. I'm also going to talk a little bit about something called Pareto analysis, which is really how do I combine these two to get a picture of where I should go next on priority. And finally, if you have something where you're trying to reduce time, constructing a time value diagram is often very helpful. Now, none of these things are forced. None of these things are forced, but I don't know why that happened. None of these things are forced, but they're tools that can be helpful for you if you use them. Okay, here's kind of where we're thinking about scoping and rescoping your project. Certainly in the beginning, and it's also helpful right after you collect some data, right? Because in the beginning, there's discussion about, from a maybe from politically what's doable, what's not, what is my span of control, and so forth. That might be a good place to start. But then also as you get data, sometimes when more data comes in, it makes it easier for you to say, oh, you know what, we are burning more quarter pounders, a lot more quarter pounders. Let's fix that first and we'll make a lot of headway. All right, keep in mind though that these things can be done and should be done and looked at all throughout the project. Maybe not at the end. The end it can maybe for recommending future improvements, but throughout the project we're going to be looking for opportunities where we can narrow our focus but still keep the highest bang for the buck. Okay, so as we talked about before, scoping is an important thing, and it's important to keep it doable. Studies have really shown that if teams go on and linger over a long period of time, they tend to not deliver. So keeping focus is very, very important in terms of delivering benefit. Now, one tool that you can use, a simple tool, is one that's called an in-scope, out-scope, and you can ask the various questions about like which products are included, which ones are not, and you can take sticky notes and put them in the sphere. Like if you have a sticky note and this would be quarter pounders, you want to put them in, you put that there, and if it were Big Macs, you'd keep them out. Okay? And sometimes just showing that picture and having that picture and showing that to people is helpful. All right. Now, where else can you scope? Well, one place that I find very, very helpful is by using the SIPOC. The SIPOC can often tell me, as I said, where we can measure and where we can measure data. So if we're looking at quality or if we're looking at cycle time, we often, by using the SIPOC, can tell very quickly, say, which ones are going to have the long cycle times or the high or the low quality coming out of them. Additionally, we can look at which customers maybe that we want to work on improving things for. Another thing that you can help, that can often help, is the cost per quality algorithm, because if we know which types of defects, what the costs are to each of them, that can help give us an idea of which ones are the more important ones. Okay? Another great tool that we're going to talk about a little bit later is something called a Pareto chart. Now, what is a Pareto chart? A Pareto chart is just like a glorified bar chart that shows me how many different errors I have in each of the different process steps. right? In each of the different process steps, which ones are creating the errors, or it could be which defect types as well. It puts the highest one at the top, and it essentially says that this one is the one that is most occurring. So the idea is if we go after this, maybe this is where we want to focus our efforts first. Okay, so keep in mind that using your cost of poor quality in conjunction with this and in conjunction with looking at your SIPOC can really give you a good picture of what makes the most sense to focus on. Okay, so in our example with the McDonald's, this one might be burning quarter pounders, this one might be burning Big Macs, this one might be burning fries, and this one might be, Chicken McNuggets or something like that. And it's pretty clear we're burning a lot of quarter pounders, so maybe that's where we should focus our project. Nail that, and we can deliver some benefit quickly. Okay. Let's move on to slide 116. And this is another, a time diagram. If this is just kind of showing what you might want to use to pictorially represent where the biggest bang for the buck is. If you're working on reducing cycle time, this is for reducing cycle time. If your project is all about reducing cycle time, a time value diagram may be very helpful. And I'll show you what that is over in just a moment. If we think about this middle part here, this is the P in the SIPOC, just to show you that that's what it is. Pull data, open the template, populate the template, upload report, distribute report, and it's put in a high-level process view. Like I said, I love this view because it shows me at each of these places I can measure defects or quality level, right, which is the flip side of defects, or I can measure time. How long does this take, and what is the delay between the steps? So if I'm reducing cycle time, this is valuable for looking at, hey, maybe where's the longest time. If I'm trying to reduce defects, this kind of tells me where to look for defects, and this is going to give me that Pareto chart of which one should I go after first. We'll see what a time value diagram is in just a moment. So instead of talking about how to do it, what I'd like to do is just go to 118. There is no template for this, but essentially it's just a picture. You can do this in Excel and just color squares a little bit longer. Now what I've done here is I've colored value-added and non-value-added time. Layperson's definition, and we'll get into this a little bit more, is that this the first bullet is customer would pay for it. That's certainly value-added. However, there are a lot of things that the customer wouldn't pay for that are necessary, and those essentially transform the product or service in a significant way. What do I mean by that? Suppose you're making furniture, and one of the things is to cut the leg of one of the process steps is to cut the leg of a table out from a block. That would transform significantly that raw material into something that's usable. So that would be a value-added step, despite the fact that the customer would say, well, I don't care, I'm just going to pay you for the table. I'm not going to pay you for forming the leg out of a block. Okay, hopefully that makes a lot of sense. Non-value-added is something that creates no value for customer. I know I do realize this is circular. Or the business. In other words, there's no reason that we're doing this. These things would include delay, rework, okay, inspection, storage, but they're not limited to that. Moving stuff around. Okay, so that's all that is. All right, so here's the idea, is that for every process step, you show some height to it, or I'm sorry, you show some width to it, some length, and the length is proportional to the amount of time that it takes in the real process. You also show the delays as white space, between each of them. So you can see, for example, that in this particular process, let me just erase that for a second. There we go. Okay. In this particular process, populating the template takes a long time, and it's not considered value added. Distributing the report is value added. It also takes a long time. We might want to spend some time on this and actually reduce the time here. But we also might want to spend some time here and reduce the value added time, the non-value added time that goes into populating this report. You might argue that, hey, this is transforming this, so maybe this should be value added. That's not an invalid argument. In fact, maybe the right way to go. One thing that can be said, though, is that if we look at this, time right here, there's a minute that's just waiting time, and something like that, maybe we could cut that one down as well. Anyway, time value diagram shows essentially two things. One is it value added or not value added for each of the process steps? And it shows what how long those steps each are. I guess there's three things. How long each of those steps are, that's number two. And the third thing is what is the delay between each of the steps. That's a time value diagram. Now, there's really an art. The science is what we just talked about, right? How do we pictorially represent this? How do we calculate some things on it? And for that, Pareto analysis is very helpful. Time value diagram can be very helpful. However, the real key is to be artful about it. How can I combine the SIPOC, the cost per quality, the Pareto analysis, to put together to make a compelling story that says, you know what, here's where we can really deliver a lot of value and we can scope in our project. Okay, here's just an example of a picture that might make a lot of sense. This one might also. Okay, now just to remember this, once we have scoped, if we've changed the scope of our project, update your project charter, update your problem statement, goal statement. Also, make sure you consider, does the project plan need to change? And vital, do we need the same people on the team? If you've gotten SMEs, subject matter experts, that will be working, let's say we'll go back to the McDonald's example. Suppose I get some guys who are expert at making Big Macs, but they don't know anything about quarter pounders. If I've scoped Big Macs out of the project, I don't want them on my project. It's nothing. I mean, no offense to these folks. So how do I, I might want to say, thanks for your help. We've scoped the project down to something that doesn't involve you anymore, and so we're not going to have you on the project for being the SME anymore. I realize that can be delicate, so watch your words on that one. Okay, hopefully this was all understood. Very high level. You're asking lots of questions. Which projects are in scope? Which products are in scope? Which customers in scope? Which services? Which process steps? Which maladies? Which services that we've got? Okay. You're also asking maybe which process steps or which divisions. Anyway, we went through a lot of those questions at the beginning. So that's the first thing, asking a series of questions. Okay, some other things that we talked about. We talked about an in-scope, out-scope tool, which is really just a pictorial representation of the answers to those questions. And then we talked about a little more scientific tools, Pareto analysis, using your SIPOC to help drive that, using your cost for quality to help drive that, and then finally the time value diagram. So now it's your turn. In your view, what are the key takeaways of what we just talked about? What are the questions that you can answer, and how can you improve your business by using these techniques? All right, take care.